Hi Raiders fans, it's Jared Croker, Raider 284 here. You're listening to episode number 4 of the Bleeding Green podcast series.
So it's my pleasure once again to be interviewing yet another person in this series of ACT government/heritage interviews. So far they've been just a delight for me to participate in, but the special guest today is Alan Tongue. It is a cliche to say with each of these interviews, the person or the people in the case of the Furners need no introduction, but certainly Alan Tongue needs none. Apart from anything else, when I was lucky enough to be commissioned to write the history of the club, I was looking around for a title and Alan Tongue loomed large in that, as we will get to in the interview. But I really look forward to it, and Alan, basically what you offer in terms of the interviews is something a little different again, particularly since I'd like to spend a bit of time later on in the interview in what you've done in life after football, because that's been as important as your football career was. I think it's fair to say the kinds of things you've been doing post-football are just as important, perhaps in the long term, even more important. That's saying something given the football career. So let's kick things off. Yeah. I know you're a bush boy, as a number of the Raiders back through the years have been, and you grew up in Tamworth. So let's start with the first question. How important was it to you to be growing up in the bush? I can remember playing Tamworth in University Shield, and I remember as a city boy coming from the Northern Beaches, they were tough games. But tell us a bit about growing up in Tamworth.
Yeah, it was a wonderful childhood. Mum and Dad are my two brothers, and their families are still on the family property. It's been in our family for about 100 odd years up around there, and it was a perfect upbringing to prepare me for rugby league, I think. One, it was extremely hardworking. We all had to chip in. Having two brothers, the three boys, we were always out doing a lot of the work with Mum and Dad. And so it was great. And we had our ups and our downs. There was some real great seasons as you have on the land, and there was some real tough ones. And but I really treasured that. I had a close-knit family, which was good, and still very close to this day, and still connected to the land myself. I really cherish my upbringing.
Terrific. Now, let's go back to the earliest point at which you were playing rugby league. When was that? When was your first game of rugby league?
Yeah, for the Peel Valley Juniors, I started playing rugby league, and it was, I actually played a year of soccer, but my brother, a couple of years older than me, started playing, and I wanted to be like him and play alongside him and whatnot. So from about 6 years old, I got a footy in my hands and started playing, and probably since that day, I'm nearly everywhere I go, I've still got a footy in my hand. It's something that I just connected. I resonated with the game straight away, and always loved the physicality of it, the tackling, and but just the mateship that came out of it. And I just was captured by it. I was even from a young age, not, there wasn't as much footy on TV as there is now, but I'd even listen to footy on the radio. I just loved it that much. Just anything that I could do to be around it, to watch it, and then I remember growing up. Majority of my childhood, I used to probably get in a bit of trouble from Mum and Dad because I wasn't doing enough work on the farm, because I was always chipping and chasing the footy and playing in the backyard, and I'd be commentating to myself and just picturing being out there on the field playing in the NRL, just running around the backyard, and just. Just as soon as I got the footy in my hand from a young age, I've just been captured. I fell in love with the game.
Was there a point at which you realised that you weren't, you were pretty good at this? And was that one that fed into, how did the town football go? And at what age? Actually, let me ask that because people would be interested. At what age were you playing into the senior football?
Well, I never played senior footy in Tamworth. So at the high school, Farrer Agricultural High School that I went to, if you made the first 13, you weren't allowed to play locally in town, because you were playing University Shield, Commonwealth Bank Cup, and we had an inter-school challenge as well. So there was plenty of footy going on. And so I never actually got to play for, my dad played for the North Tamworth Bears in town, which probably would have been the club that I would have went to. But coming straight out from school, I didn't get that chance.
And did that fit in just about, reading your bio, and as I did some time back, the Broncos picked you up, did they not? And be interested, again, people would be interested in that. Broncos signed you in some capacity, age, if not year 10, 11, 12, if I'm not wrong.
Right. Yeah.
And what was that all about?
Yeah, so probably before that as well, played in the under-15 schoolboys coming through. So back to that question, I was probably good at footy. I wouldn't say I was unbelievable going through the grades as a young kid. Still just loved it and continued to get, I suppose, a couple of little rep sides in year 6, playing in a northwest side, going down and playing in Penrith. I remember going down and playing there. And then in year 9, I made the CHS side. And after that became a little bit of interest. There was a little bit of interest from Parramatta to come and do a trial. To come down there. Newcastle was naturally the closest to Tamworth, only been about 3.5 hours away, but the Broncos had always had an affiliation with Farah. Players would go and try their trade up there. And it was only a scholarship. They wasn't signing on a dotted line. It was just a scholarship. And they actually helped out, paying for some fees as well with your... to be able to go away on trips and different things. I knew that had certainly helped Mum and Dad. Always give you a few free T-shirts and stuff like that. So that had.
And was that to keep, in a sense, to keep you and perhaps even the family interested in, like there was no other strings attached, as it were, at that period to the Broncos?
Yep, that's right. And so it'd just mean we'd do a couple of camps. One in particular in the January. You'd go up in the pre-season and you'd train up there, and. It was a wonderful experience. It was a really great
with the senior, with the big side. Okay, a few good footballers around then.
I still remember doing one of the fitness sessions. Some of the old school training that they used to do, and training alongside Shane Webke and Alan Langer, and Kevy Walters, and Wendell Saylor, Lottie Takiri, Darren Lockyer. It was unbelievable as a young kid from the bush to be able to
get treated well. What was that?
Yeah, there was everybody came in. There was sort of 20 or 30 odd kids that would come in for a week-long camp, and they would do a couple of them. The Broncos, cast a fairly wide net, and, I was lucky enough to be a part of that over the 3 years while I was at school.
So the obvious segue is the Raiders sniffing around, and thank heavens that they did at that point. 1999, you signed, if I'm not wrong.
End of 98, yep.
End of 98.
Before 99,
And what led up to that? I mean, I suppose... in terms of interviews or the way in which they'd actually reached out to you, what led to your joining? I suppose I'm certain that the most famous signature was one Mal Meninga, but people are always interested in the way in which the club is reaching out. How did they manage it with you?
Yeah, so I was really, I was really close to going to the Broncos because of that connection and that over the 3 years, but. Mum and Dad came up to the Bronx with us just at the end when we were, talking contracts. We actually went out.
Would that be in 98?
Right. And so we went out for dinner with Wayne and his wife at the time, and we had an experience. Went to a game and everything. We did the same, and we came down to Canberra. Mum couldn't come down to Canberra, but Dad and I came down. Same thing. We went to a game.
Who'd you meet up with here?
We went back to the Kingston Hotel.
As you do.
After the game.
As you do. Main vein Canberra culture.
Cook your own steak, met the players, and I was coming away from it, and I said, this feels like a big Tamworth. It feels like a big country town.
The big country town, yeah.
And I've always been somebody, I don't like crowds, I don't like going to shopping centres, and I don't like all that sort of stuff. It felt like a big country town. And I didn't have family down this way. That I knew too much, so it was a big sort of step to come. I had some family. My mum's sister lives just out of Brizzy, but that's what drew me here. It was a country town. It was that atmosphere. The players were great when I met them. They just seemed like really down to earth guys, and that's.
So was Mel still coach then?
Mel
yes,
was
he
coach,
was. Yeah, okay.
So, Mal was a coach, Mick Hagan.
Got that big hand around yours, not that there would have been much in it, I don't suppose.
No. So, it was great. And that was simple as that. And people, have probably tried to say, well, you went to the Raiders because there was a clearer pathway or something there for you. The Broncos were a star-studded lineup. That had nothing to do with it.
It's great to hear that. I mean, and I've heard it a number of times, but, when I was actually putting stuff together for the book, a number of times with the Bush footballers, and there were a bunch, especially early on, but that's continued right the way through. And amongst other things, one of the most, what does one say, considered passionate hobby breakthroughs is pig shooting, if I'm not wrong. I'm not sure whether you've ever been a part of that. Certainly some of the Raiders have.
Yeah, that's right. Well, back up home we used to, but, like the love of going fishing and being able to go to the Murrumbidgee out here or whatever it is, those little things that, and not being stuck in traffic every day like it is in Sydney or wherever it is.
So it's I've stated, that's for sure. Yeah. Terrific. So let's push it on just a little bit. Debut first grade game in the year 2000. If I believe it's correct to say that they came on against Brisbane. That seemed to be, a very happy coincidence, I guess, to play against them. And what was your experience of that first season in the first grade? Did you, in the top grade, did you have what you hear all the time, in other words, faster, harder, etc.? Was that your initial impression, or were you well equipped because of your background, which would have been a bit different to those, spoon-fed city kids?
So I'll give you a bit of a picture here. So I'm a second-year apprentice mechanic at the time. I'm working at a place called Scuderia Veloce Motors out in Phillip. I'm in my second year as an apprentice mechanic. I'm playing in reserve grade. We're playing up in Newcastle. We're only 5 rounds into the season there playing, and at the end of the game, I only took an overnight bag because we were only going up and back. We stayed the night before, coming home on the bus afterwards. Mel come into the dressing sheds and said, I want you to come with us to Brisbane to be a part of the extended squad. I hadn't trained with first grade. I'd been in the reserve grade, just come up from the under-19s the year before. And so I jumped on. It was just as cover at the time. There was 3 or 4 of us as cover to go up. And the guy that was actually carrying a bit of a niggle was Kenny Nagus, I'm pretty sure it was. And so I'm probably thinking I'm not going to be the next in line to play on the wing for Kenny. And then only 2 or 3 days before the game, they said, you're in, mate. Mal said, we want you. And I think they moved Mark McLinden to the, off the bench and in here, and I slotted in there. And you're right.
Harlan slotting in where? What
was in the utility.
Got you.
Value, but mainly playing in the second row can cover a bit of 9. And as it only came in the last couple of days of the camp that we were up there, right, to buy some gear while I was up there because I'd only took an overnight bag because I was meant to be back at work. My boss was filthy that I was taking the week off, and that's
different time there.
That's right.
Look at that.
And so I get this opportunity to play against a club that I was so close to probably signing with if I was going to go somewhere. And it was on a Friday night, Broncos versus Raiders, one of those, I suppose, the grand finals that never were, that they always talk about. And then up against them on a Friday night, it was absolutely packed. But what about this? We're in the warm-up. And I'm always somebody that wants to do some contact. My last thing that I want to do, I want to get my contact right. Right. So that's my last thing before I go into the sheds. I'm a nervous little, debutante looking around.
Starry-eyed.
And players are all walking off to go back towards the dressing shed. There's fireworks happening before this Friday night game. The crowd was roaring. And I'm going, who's going to hold the tackle pad for me? And so I asked one of the coaches. Now, the coach that I had to get to do the tackling was Glenn Lazarus. And I came in to do something, and I was racing in 100 mile an hour, and I hit him like this, and I was like, going, holy dooly, he's the assistant coach. What's the real thing going to be like? But got out onto the field and got into it, and I was lucky enough. We played and we got beat, but came back, and then I went to work on the Monday. So we came home on the Saturday. I went to work on the Monday, but I came in, and I remember driving in, and Mal said, mate, you're late. I said, oh yeah, I've just come straight from work. He said, boys, I'm playing with you, you're going to be in again next week. I was like, right. So I jumped into the video and had to take a little bit more time off work to make a few more training sessions and different things like that. And in my debut year, I was lucky enough to play 22 games.
Yeah. Let's just stick with that just for a moment, because again, people would be interested. So there you're balancing work and footy, and it's tricky at that stage. At what point, how soon did you make the decision, righto, I'm going football here. I've got it. That's the opportunity that's being presented.
Yeah, well, I suppose to get understanding of it, about 3 years to do a mechanics apprenticeship. It took me 7.
Yeah.
So I stuck
But you
at
just,
it.
the good news being that you continue with which all smart footballers do. That's, even today.
So it probably, in that 2002, I sort of, really, I tried to hang on to it a little bit more in 2000 and 2001, doing the little bits and pieces and knuckled down a little bit more and went back to it again but got it finished. But it's a different era now, but there was still, doing a bit of that work. And, it was important for me too. I found great balance in being able to it brought out the best footy in me, having that. And I think that, and we'll go on to it later, but the community stuff has been really important to me, and I think it's always given me a great perspective on
something outside of football. And as we know, that's precisely what we're starting to hear again now, and quite rightly, as it becomes such a preoccupation sort of thing, and the footballers are narrowed off. Even more call now, perhaps even than back then, to think about something that gives you whatever it might be outside. It could be vocation, etc. Let's just move on. So 1999, just for me to be clear, so when you're Rookie of the Year, are you Rookie of the Year in 99 or 2000?
2000.
Yeah.
2000. Yeah.
But you were coming off them, so for the next, I was surprised in that, and I'd forgotten with, having done the book, but I'm not even sure I put it in the book, but you were coming off the bench from basically 2000 all the way through to 2005-ish. What was that? I know I had a question down on that, but did you at any point find that frustrating? What was happening in that period of time? Were you beginning to not by any means second guess yourself and saying, maybe I'm not going to get in the first grade, or were you always confident that you make it if you stuck with it and stuck to the pretty much your own game plan? Were you did your confidence wane or not?
I don't think there probably would have been times that I might have got frustrated, but I can't ever recall thinking, I'm so frustrated about being on the bench. I was just super pumped to be playing NRL. And I think that was that mentality that I had. And, for a fair bit of it too, I was playing sometimes 50 and 60 minutes. I'm coming on after 20 minutes of playing the rest of the game. And that's what the team needed. And I can't ever really remember getting frustrated by it. I'd get a start every now and again, but coming off the bench. But I was just, super grateful to be playing. And so it wasn't until the 2006 that got a bit more of a chance to play at 13, and Jason Croker moved to edge back row more so than his lock forward position, and we sort of got that opportunity.
Did that happen from the start of 2006? Did you have that position, or did it soon sort of thing into the season?
I can't really remember.
Yeah,
exactly
right. Okay.
Off the
but
top.
you certainly had it early on, and then that was right.
So.
And at that point, and it's interesting because that's a long sort of almost germination period, which a lot of players, I'm then thinking of your footballing life post 2006, which is so physical, so significant in the context of tackling, and I remember it only too well, and how crucial that was in the years that followed. But would you say that sort of almost that period of coming off the bench finally assisted in your first grade career?
Yeah, I think I certainly did. I'm having to actually cover a number of positions. It's funny, in my work that I do now, everything that footy had done previously has actually set me up so well to do the work that I'm doing now.
Right.
And so at the time, I probably didn't think of it, but it was an absolute blessing. And having to cover a few different positions, I had to really work hard, as in, I'm not just looking at video for a 13 or 11, 12 in the edge back row, left edge, right edge back row. I've also got to look at 9. But what have you got thrown in halfback or 5'8"? You need to know the plays there and the structure. And so I really had to work hard on my game, and it was a really great learning curve, for me, and that really set me up. So when I did even when I played in 2006, even though I might have started the game, I still transitioned between a couple of positions, So, whether to come on and just play a little bit of 9 while they had a breather and then come back to 13, whatever that may be. I still had to move around in a few of the positions. I just ran on.
How did you find Matt Elliott as a coach?
He was great. he was different to what
Very.
what I'd had previously.
Yep.
And once again, that was
Because thinking outside of the square, or
Absolutely.
in what way different sort of thing for you?
and it was really, once again, it's been really important in the work that I do now, is actually seeing those sides of it. The 4 coaches that I had all had a different way that they
Just take
approached
the
it.
viewers and me through it. I would be able to name them, but
Mal Meninga,
Yep.
into Matty Elliott, into Neil Henry, into Dave Furner.
Yeah.
And so they all brought a different, and having different strength and conditioning coaches too, the different style of training and everything that we did. But Matty he was somebody that thought outside of the box and, put us in different situations. And it wasn't probably a bit of the old school stuff with Mal and Alex Corvo back in the day and, doing the 1 kilometre time trial runs and different things, but there was actually skills games and there was, different things. And instead of passing just footies, we'd be passing tennis balls and different things like that.
Yeah,
and so it actually changed up a lot of the way that I'd always thought footy was, and coming from the bush. But he opened up that, there's a lot more ways you can skin a cat, so to speak.
Let's move. I mean, in terms of coaches and in terms of the football of the period, the Raiders certainly had some good moments in those first years of the new century, as it were. But I'd like to actually spend a little bit of time on season 2008. It was one of those seasons, if I'm not wrong, I had a quick look at the history just to refresh my memory, that the first half of the season, I think the team was running, it might have been about 50% or something like that. And then some of those results that then followed, and some of the football above all that followed. I mean, I myself getting on at that point in time, but always appreciative of good footy. That footy in the second half of 2008 was something to behold. We were talking a bit earlier before the interview about speed and how important that is. It's always been important, but at some certain moments in the game, speed is particularly important. But the one thing, as you hear the cliche, you can't coach speed, and you can't. But the way in which the Raiders were putting together some of those results in the second half of 2008, what were you thinking of that? Did that surprise you on the field, to go so well in that second half of the season?
Yeah, well, there's plenty to sort of all bring 2008 together, I suppose, is that, a huge changeover of players. And in 2007, when Neil first came in too, we actually stripped her right back and we went back to the basics. It was really, really simple stuff, like just, short side, 3-on-2s, just real simple drills. And then Neil tells us that he's going to move on. We had
early in the season, as it turned out, March, I think.
Yeah. Players, we had challenges with off-field dramas. There was plenty going on in the background, but we were a really galvanised group. When we talk about the culture, we had a really great mentality. Excuse me. And when I talk about that mentality, we wanted to play for each other.
Yeah.
We were really passionate about playing for each other. And
it's still a factor in footy, isn't it? You look at Penrith at the moment. They're a classic example in contemporary football. Clearly, there's such a great camaraderie there.
Yep.
You get that extra factor. But tell us a bit more about that.
And I think the basics that were just ingrained in us over 2007, and we worked hard. Neil, he was tough, conditioning-wise. We were fit. We had a simple game plan, and we just ripped in. It was really, really, I've got a little bit of a saying now that I've probably learned from that, but the bigger the game, the simpler the message needs to be.
Yeah.
And I think that's what helped us so much. We had a really simple game. People knew their roles, and by the end of that 2008, we actually had so many injuries. If you were fit, you basically got a Guernsey.
Yeah, right.
And that wasn't just, you took that for granted. You stepped up to the standard that was there already, and we ripped in. And it was a really special season for me because we've been through a few lean years. But it's interesting, the strength and conditioner that was that part of that. I only chatted to him, and he was doing Sean Edwards, and he's down there with the New Zealand team. He was actually in New Zealand helping them this year. Won premierships at the Rabbitohs. His favourite ever season in a part of any footy
Right.
was 2008
Is that right?
because of the culture that we had.
Yeah,
in that.
okay.
You know, it doesn't pan out the way that we all wanted it at the back end. But, you know, when I walk away and I never got to win a premiership at the club, now that was my driving force day in, day out. I just wanted to win a premiership. But, you know, if you can walk away going, did we actually reach the potential that we had trained day in and day out for? If we know that we reached that, you know, you could win a grand final, but you could probably say we didn't play to our potential. We didn't win a premiership, but we walked away knowing we absolutely played the best we could.
The peak. Yeah.
And so I leave content with that.
They're interesting years, those. Like sort of, so 2006, you lock away the number 13 position. 2007, and rightly so, you become captain because of the work ethic and much else, the sort of leadership. And then you get to 2008. Did you feel that in terms of your development, your personal development, things, I mean, I'm thinking, I do believe I'm right in saying that in 2006, you established the all-time tackles record, which, depending on who you read, is either 1,081 or 1,087, one or the other. But either way, it dwarfs the next largest, which is Nathan Hindmarch, one of the favourite footballers of people who love football, without a doubt. But I mean, you're that many more. Did you feel that your own game was developed under the captaincy, that moved not just as, you know, one of the great defenders of the code, but also in terms of aspects, what you were offering the team? And did that come to, you know, assist some of the younger players, of course, and there were some seriously good younger players in that 2008 season?
Yeah, well, I think to get that captaincy and it'll bring us to 2008 there, but you know, we'd lost a heap of players. 2007, you know, we lost Wolford, Davico, Croker, Adam Mould, Clinton Shivkowski. We lost, I think it was a huge amount.
And you took over the captaincy from Clinton Shivkowski from memory,
And so we'd lost all of this, you know, leadership, I suppose, that we'd had these huge amount of games. Jason Smith, you know, all these players had moved on. And so it was a bit of a baptism of fire. I was probably, you know, one of those guys that had only just got into, you know, run-on position. But, you know, when you look at the other people that were about, I was maybe in a fortunate position to be able to pick that up. But I think those years it had me primed. I'd done my time and I just kept working really, really hard. I had to cover a number of different positions, so I really had to think hard about the game in and around it. And so that had set me up into that sort of position to get that. And then I think the club, we'd recruited like that too. We'd got a lot of young guys or some people that wanted a bit of a chance to come. And so there was a lot of guys that were hungry to prove themselves, and that led to that mentality and that culture in 2008, I think. And you know, my leadership style all the way through is more about just the actions and trying to lead by example there. And when I needed to speak, I suppose I spoke to the group, but it was more about just leading by example. And you know, I think that rubbed off on the players because we weren't a big talking team. We just went out there and just belted guys in defence and tried to throw the ball around and back ourselves in attack.
So, Alan, in terms of the captaincy and indeed a young group, the club was undergoing a sort of pretty much a sea change period. Was one part of the way you approached the captaincy, not just getting out there and doing it by example, which is always preeminent, it must be said, what's happening on the field, but also in terms of looking around and trying to kind of enhance your own captaincy by looking at the way other people are captaining in the past, in the present? Were there any sort of former players or present players that you looked at then and thought about what they were doing right?
Yeah, no, I think I've always been, you know, a pretty deep thinker in regards to, you know, way that a lot of players have gone about their footy. So when I look back over my career and people that have influenced me, certainly in that space, I look at some of the teammates, whether it was Clint Shivkowski who come before me and Simon Wolford, but even Mal as the coach and the way that he coached and he went about his things. Ruben Wiki, you know, I love playing alongside Reuben. He never got the captaincy, but he was he was our spiritual leader, and so I always took a lot from Rubes and the way that he conducted himself, and so I look back at a number of people that I think I've taken little snippets of, but I probably when I look back at the way that I was a captain, I think the greatest influence the way that I did that is my mum and my dad.
Right. In what sense? Tell us more.
Well, Dad once again and Mum, they're the most extremely hard-working people. They don't carry on like they're entitled to anything. And my mum's always had a mentality of serving before being served.
Right.
And I think that was just ingrained in me as a young kid. And I saw it day in, day out. And they'd be the last in the line to get something. They would, at the drop of a hat, go and help the next door neighbour. They would do whatever they could to help somebody else to make it a bit easier. And I think that was just ingrained in me and my brothers, the way that we had to go about our life. And that's how I wanted to be as a player, and that's how I wanted to be as a captain.
And of course, to pick that up, as we've heard many times over, and it's still as valid as it ever was, the harder you work, the luckier you get in footy. And there's no doubt about that. That was, absolutely. Can we say a little bit more about that fascinating season 2008? And I say that because, and it's probably worth airing it, a few of the people who wrote on that second half of the year, one of them was Paul Kent, and I'll get you to comment on, I'll mention Paul Kent and then Matty Johns, but Paul Kent in the Telegraph wrote this in the second half of that year. They, the Raiders, are the antidote for stale cookie-cutter game plans that are in vogue in the NRL today. Game plans where teams drive out dummy half, one play after the other, forever and ever, until they finally grind their way into the opposition's 20-metre and polish off the set with a kick to the corner. And if they don't score, they get to do it all over again. Wonderful. These game plans can bore the spots off grandma and are why the Raiders found a new legion of fans with yesterday's, and he was referring to, and goodness, I'd forgotten about that, Penrith Panthers, 74-12. My, those were the days. 74-12 over the Panthers. They, the Raiders, are the best team to watch in the NRL. And also, I think I have to actually quote Matty Johns in his, with his usual wry humour. Suddenly, Canberra's footballers were answering more questions than its politicians. Not since the glory days of the early 90s had the Raiders enjoyed such attention. They were the quiet, nerdy little kid in the corner of the classroom that all of a sudden every girl wanted to kiss at the disco. A classic. And of course, we do remember, the set of score lines we know only too well in that second half of the year. And it really was brilliant to watch, and it really was sort of out of the box. So as you say, throwing it around and doing things differently, which raises the issue of getting to that semi-final. And we know that, of course, we've had a great rivalry with Cronulla over the years. That was a surprising result, and I'm sure people would be interested in that the second half of the year had gone so well. Were there any reasons you're looking back on that result? Cronulla put 30-odd points, wasn't it, to about 10. What were the reasons for that? If you look back on it, what did you think about that game and that result?
Yeah, well, we certainly went in confident because of that run that we had. So there was no lack of confidence, and there was no cockiness about us whatsoever. That wasn't a part of what we were about all season. And so and as it can be in footy and in those big games, if you don't get off to that right start or things don't get there, and maybe there was some expectation and a bit more pressure we might have placed on ourselves in the season gone. But
was the relative youth, do you think, come into it?
I think yeah, and even for some of the more senior guys that were in there, we probably hadn't played a huge amount of finals footy either. So I think it wasn't just from the younger guys, but it just wasn't meant to be, and it was unfortunate that it went that way after the confidence that we'd sort of played with, in particular in that back half of the year. But we still went away knowing that we had lost the game, but we were ready because we'd finished sixth. We were hoping, that there's still going to be a next week's game. And you know what? We're going to turn back up and we're going to rip back in and play the style of footy we knew we could play. But
a big but. Tell the viewers.
When first comes 8th, Melbourne, you're playing Melbourne, in Melbourne. an almost unwinnable game. The Warriors go across there to do that, and they upset Melbourne. And so the next place loser was us in the 6th position, and we get bundled out in the first week. It was absolutely devastating.
Yeah, gutting. I mean, it was gutting certainly to be a Raiders supporter, what it would have been like for the players. But anyway, it was a marvellous season, and one can't help reflecting on the Dally M Awards of that year. I do quote Don Furner, the younger, in this, and saying that, we were always used to, back through the previous decade, being at the back of the room, and suddenly we found ourselves on a front table. And I do believe, I know I'm right in saying that Neil Henry was the coach of the year, but of course you got the lock of the year as well. You got the captain of the year. Personally, and I know you can't divorce that from the way, you would have taken a grand final every day of the week and then some, but it must have been a very, when you've reflected on it or have reflected on it, that must have been a very rewarding year, because I'll just throw into this, and we'll come to that second perhaps, and that is, you didn't play the representative football that so many people, and goodness knows I include myself, such as it is, that it looked, you should have played more representative football, at the very least coming off the bench in, even, the Australian team. But now let's park that for a moment. So the Dally M's, you get those two. Do you look back on that, and was that worthy consolation for the season that you got those two moments of considerable recognition?
Yeah, I think it was, it was a real honour for myself, and I think it was great recognition for the club as well, as you've just spoke about. We got a little bit closer to the front there too, which is nice, not down in the dark seats at the back. But
as long as everyone behaved themselves, and I'm not certain they would have, but go on.
It was great. But as you'd mentioned, I would have given it all back in a heartbeat to be able to, get to the grand final and play and do all of that. But it was good. And what it really highlights to me is that, we had a team first, a club first mentality. So the coach tells us early on that he's moving to go back to the Cowboys. Now, we could have easily kicked stones and moaned and whinged and carried on and been real selfish about it. But no one's bigger than the club. And we ripped in, and it motivated us, I think, and it actually made us work even harder, to the point where the coach, who is leaving, gets actually the coach of the year.
Yeah,
that says a lot about the playing group,
wasn't it? Absolutely,
and about the coaching staff too.
Absolutely, the coaching staff and the coach. Let's tease that out a little bit. How did, in terms of the way you handle that news from Neil, early on, and I remember being gutted as a passionate Raiders supporter that should be named, and for the very reason you said, you can't blame the players if they're going to be kind of kicking stones, as you say. But the opposite ultimately happened. Was that a combined effort? Was it everyone pitching in? The players, certainly, you start there. The captain, certainly. Also just lining up with a coaching staff that was determined, a bit of magic started to happen. But did you have discussions with Neil about this, especially early in the season?
Yeah, there was definitely discussions between the coaching staff and the leadership group that we'd had. We'd started a leadership group in 2007, and so we'd certainly had that conversation. And I think a bit of the unspoken sort of message about that everybody could hear in the background, but it was never officially said that. But Neil was going to the Cowboys where he'd done his apprenticeship.
Yeah.
And so he had a really close connection there. We all understood that.
Yeah.
But it was with a much better roster than we had at the Raiders here. More of a chance to win a premiership up there than with the group that we had. And so we'd chatted about that. We had chatted about that. Nobody had officially said that. Neil hadn't said that. Nobody had said that. But it was this underlying message that people had heard. And so we used that. We used that not to be bitter or anything like that, but it had probably it gave us a little bit of a freedom too.
Yeah.
Is that, okay, this is what it is. We're going to back ourselves and we're going to play for each other here. And we still played for Neil too, don't worry about that. It wasn't that we played, we ripped in. But there was almost, there was a little bit of pressure taken off, I think, in regards to that. that we had that little bit of a freedom now to just go and back ourselves.
And did you, as captain, and when you're saying we, and we talked about it, did you make that a part, in a sense, of the way you went about things, to use that through the season?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I remember being with our leadership group and the playing group as well, without the coaching staff, and having this message and this mentality that how we wanted to train and how we wanted to play.
Yeah, excellent. So it was it was a big year. Football goes on, and Dave Furner comes into the mix. What was that transition like for you and for the club?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of was a pretty quick little transition too. When I think about it at the time, there wasn't these huge negotiations and all these different coaches from a playing point of view anyway that I heard about. It was a pretty quick little transition. And I debuted with Dave Furner in the side. And so I'd had that connection. But it was a great little story too, of coming back in. Don Furner Senior, and obviously Don at the club here as the CEO, and Dave being, one of our greats and such a hard-working, done time and coached and different things like that. But to be able to give him that privilege, it was a pretty big moment for our club. And so, I resonated really well with Dave because he was extremely hardworking. I think, being his first coaching gig, he would have learnt a hell of a lot, like our first-time coaches in the NRL do. And there was some tough times, but there was also some good times that he got to see as well.
Was they, people would be interested in this, and you can look back on it, and that is in the years of Dave Furner as coach. We know the later part, 2012, 2013. Was he unlucky? And without getting, was he unlucky in that he had to attempt to bring into the fold and to coach difficult, younger, talented footballers? Was that a part of the challenge that he was? Many coaches are not up to when they've got, the enfant terrible, some of those younger players who are mightily difficult to coach or to handle. Was that the biggest issue, sort of problem that confronted him, or not?
Oh, I think, if you probably look across all NRL clubs, there's obviously going to be varying levels in it, but there's always going to be. So I think that is something in every club, but it's probably extremely hard for a new coach with the younger players and with some different challenges that might go on. So I think that it probably was a challenge for him, like with some of the stuff that had gone on. But we had there was enough talent in there to be able to get that out. But obviously, there's way more than just coaching footy to it. So you're right. I think Dave probably had some extra challenges that maybe a lot of other clubs mightn't. For their coaches at that point in time. Not
to mention, obviously, the fact of Don Junior. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was, it was making it very difficult. Sort of the kinds of things that were easy for journalists to write, but it was hard. So in terms of your playing career, let's bring it to that, because I certainly want to spend a bit of time on life after footy that's involved in footy, and we'll get to that shortly. But you retired in 2011, if I'm not wrong. Was the primary reason that you felt that the football you were producing, and indeed the physical toll on your body, and I'll talk about, I will raise the prospect, given that I know you were born in 1980. I believe I'm 30 years and a day older than you, so that's I've held on to that. And given my age, I can certainly remember a player called Dean Lance, and there are a lot of similarities between Dean Lance and what he offered the Raiders club back in the late 80s, the 80s and early 90s, and what you offered. He, it must be said, had around him a pretty considerable sort of set of playing talent right there. But when you retired, what were the reasons? What were the reasons why you felt you should retire?
Yeah, well, I had 1 year to go on my contract. I still had 12 months to go, and I had every intentions of playing that out, and if I could, I'd go again, to be honest. But I'd had probably 3 years. I'd gone with a couple of, I had a shoulder reconstruction, I think it was in 2003, that kept me out of nearly the whole season. I think I only might have played 3 or 4 games in that year. But other than that, I'd had some little niggles here and there, but didn't really miss too much footy. And then I nearly had 3 years of back-to-back niggles that I just kept playing through. I busted a wrist really bad one year, needed surgery on it, said I'm just going to persist with it and get through to the back end of the year. I had groin troubles. I kept playing with that. I'll just wait, I'll get the surgery at the end of the year. And then in 2011, 4 minutes into the round 1 game, I'd finally got over a few niggles, got through a good pre-season. I get out of dummy half, we're playing Cronulla at home in round 1. I take the ball deep in the line, I play at the back, I pass the footy. Ben Ross absolutely nails me with my back turn.
Right.
And I do a grade 3 AC.
Right.
My AC sitting up about here.
Right.
Can't lift my arm. Doc says, you're going to need surgery. You're going to be out for about 20 odd weeks. And that was round 1.
Yeah.
He said, you know what, we could try and tape it down and needle it up and get through if you wanted to. I'd had these niggles, and I said, well, I'm going to try and get through it. And so I just had about 4 weeks off, trying to get the strength back into the arm, and we just taped it down and we needled it up and just tried to play for the rest of the year with it. And that moment probably was going, geez, I just can't take a trick here over these last few years. And then you could just see that I'd probably lost a yard of speed, and I wasn't a quick player. I wasn't a quick player right throughout in my prime. And then I lost that yard of speed. And then I think it just started to take that toll. And when you're just a little bit off, I was a player that, I'm not super talented, right? I needed to be at my best to be able to perform to the standards that I wanted and that the team needed from me. And so when you're just off, it's not good enough. And so I had to make that decision. And as hard as I'd been fighting for contracts, right? I've been fighting, and I had one on the table that I could have, and I had to hand it back. It was so hard to say, look, I'm going to have to do it. And it was putting the club first too. Yeah. There was somebody better to do the job than me. I'm not
surprised in the terms, and we'll talk about you and the club in a little bit. Are you one of those, or were you one of those footballers who took issues home? Your wife's Katie, isn't it? I've not met Katie, but would you go home? I mean, did you go home and talk about that with mum and dad, with Katie, or you kind of wrestle with it and say what you've decided?
Yeah, and so definitely I chatted about it with my wife. I didn't tell my mum and dad till late. When I told mum and dad over the phone, I could nearly hear my mum crying from Tamworth. How devastated she was. Mum, they loved the ride, being a part of it all, and it was really, it was one of those moments actually that it was there going, you know what, it's been such a roller coaster journey for me personally. But actually the people that were a part of it and how much they invested and were a part of this journey too, and how much it meant to them, was something that I probably didn't understand fully until I said, you know what, my time's up, to be able to do that. But we definitely talked, and I just didn't want to, I wanted to wait there and make sure that it was right, and it wasn't just wrestling with me. And you're such a long time retired, and as it kept getting closer, I think once you've started to have those thoughts and you've started to verbalise it with a few people around you, I think the decision's been made. And so it was really hard for me. And there was an offer to go to Leeds as well, at the back end. And it wasn't, if I was going to keep playing, it was going to be in a Raiders jersey. I wasn't playing for anybody else. And so I was either going to take up, do that last year of my contract, or I was calling it quits.
Looking back on that, and it sounds like no regrets because it was the right decision. Would that be, is that fair, or that you would look back on that now and say, if I had my time over, that would be the best decision to make, and that's the decision I did make?
Yeah, I think it is. There is still that little part you go, would it have been good just to see, could have you just got through that pre-season, got your shoulder fixed and had a good season, and then all of a sudden you're back to where it is? Or, you know, do you go to Leeds and enjoy that and, you know, the game being a touch slower over there too? Is it something that you could have went and experienced? But I feel deep down my gut tells me that I did make the right decision.
So let's, just in case we don't get to it in the interview, but you're saying about your mum and dad, how closely did they watch? You know, it sounds like they were sort of basically doting on your career in the very best sense. Yep. Did they come down, go to many games? How did that work for them?
Yeah, they came to a few, but I mean, there's a fair distance.
Yeah, I'll say
7.5, 8 hours drive.
Yeah, sure.
So they didn't get to.
You want to have a good game, that's what you're saying.
That's right, absolutely. That was, it was great. You know what? They came down for my for a couple of milestone birthdays and my pop as well.
Right.
And they came down to watch a game, and they had family from Brisbane. My Auntie Bev, Uncle Steve, Nat and Neil, my cousins from up there, they came down. We have got another auntie that's over in Illabo near Junee, in Wagga, and they brought all their family across. And they came across in 2000, so it's in my debut year. Right. They came across to watch a game when we played the West Tigers, and it snowed. They all come to watch that game.
I was there. I was there.
And so what an amazing experience to be part of. But yeah, they got to a few games here and there. But
that was of course the Christmas card of the Raiders that year. I'll never forget it. I think I've still got one actually, but that was the most extraordinary moment.
So they'd been part of a few. But
that very game, I love that.
Yeah, that's right. So they'd but you know they got the pay TV up home sort of thing, which we never had as kids. But they got that, and it'd be a communal thing. You'd all come and watch the TV. And growing up in a small community, I grew up in a place called Loombra, which is about 20-25 minutes out of Tamworth, a little farming community. There's only a church and a hall there, but a few of the local families come together and all watch the footy in the Tongue household and go and watch the Raiders. And so they, even though they probably didn't get to as many games, they certainly barracked for it from up that way.
Well, you're talking about making the right decision for the club, and you're always going to do that. As I mentioned at the outset of the interview, that when I was looking for the right title for the Raider history that I wrote a few years ago, it was the case that I came across a discussion you'd had with Jared Croker, and indeed, of course, playing in the earliest stages, middle stages of his career. I should remember middle stages, but when he had the spiky hair, etc., as distinct from the grizzled old Alan Tongue. But him making the point about, in terms of the way you played, that you were always absolutely bleeding green. Now, it wasn't wholly original, but in terms of the way in which it was applied to a player, it fitted you better than anyone else that has ever actually pulled on the jersey. Can we just spend a bit of time, perhaps, and we'll pick up life after football, when we go to another reel here, but in terms of your, the way in which you responded, and you've already spoken about when you joined the club and the reasons why you joined the club. Did the club finally give you what you were looking for, and do you feel that it was a two-way relationship? In other words, one part of it was the culture that was developing. It's had its moments in, not decline, but its off moments, but certainly culture's always been crucial to the club. But also the contribution that you made to that culture. Was that something during your playing career that you thought a bit about?
I remember doing my retirement speech. I actually got Benny Polycom, who's still here, to give me a bit of a hand, and we were writing up some things. And I said in that retirement speech that rugby league doesn't owe me anything. It's me that owes the game everything. And I remember when I first got that footy, when I was playing in the under sixes, the love that I had for the game. Club didn't owe me anything. They let me live out a childhood dream, and so to me, it's just been such a wonderful place to be able to. We have dreams as kids, and some come true for some people and some don't. It takes you on a different path, but if you're a young kid in the bush that just kicks a footy around all day, pretending to commentate himself in his little backyard. The bird cage was my goalpost, kicking over the top of that.
Was Frank Hyde calling when you were a youngster? Did you get there, if it's long enough and high enough,
Yeah,
straight between the posts?
So, and then for me to be able to do that and to live that childhood dream out, rugby league's given me everything and more. And that's why it brought me to the work that I do in community, is to try and find a way to always to give back, and to understand that nobody's bigger than the game, nobody's bigger than the club. It's about doing the best you can in your moment, but you never forget that, and I think it helps you on the field. But footy's just this amazing vehicle. It is just this amazing vehicle to me to enrich my life, but it can actually enrich so many others, and we see that in our communities. And I see it in my mum and dad, right? The way that it just brought so much joy to their life. But I see it on a young kid's face. A boy or a girl that's looking from the stands when they watch the players run out. I see it in a gala day. I see it in a little come and try rugby league for the first time. I see it when the players sign an autograph. I see it when they go to a hospital visit. I see it when they attend an education workshop. I see it in a juvenile justice centre. I see it in an Alex McConaughey centre. And I see the power of rugby league just going, you know what? There's something out there that I can jump into, that I can learn from. I can be better next week than I was last week.
It's just a joy to hear those words. And I have the question, talking about the kind of your love of the game, that you owe rugby league nothing at all because of what it's given you, and indeed how much you're now giving back to that game. In recent years, we've seen a change, and in the last 12, 18 months, the idea, one might have called it a brain fart, but it's a lot more than that now, and that is to say some games being played in Las Vegas. What do you think of, let's take that initiative. I mean, we know rugby league's been talked about, let's take it more internationally, and we know that the islands, the whole Pacifica element is really strengthening league in every direction. Speak to Penrith, for example, but it is happening that way. What do you think of this Las Vegas initiative?
Yeah, well, one of the things is our game, our players are like supreme athletes, and I think we often probably think of the NFL or these sort of as these unbelievable supreme athletes, whereas I really believe that when the world gets to see it, you'll actually see that rugby league players, they're ultimate warriors. They're super fit, they're fast, they're skillful, they are highly tuned athletes. And so we know that in Australia, but I don't think the broader world knows that. So it's a chance to do that. But the game's also been through a period, and just of late, where I think they've got to make some business decisions, and it's about opening up new markets. So I think the game has, looked at it from a couple of different angles. I can't see, the game being, trying to take on the NFL or anything like that. We know that there are some local competitions, but the way that you can view it and watch it and capture that audience, you've got to see it to believe it, to become it, right? And so I think that there's chances for the game to be able to do this. And it's not about trying to overtake America and overtake the NFL. No, that's not what it's about. But about showing it to a new audience, to be able to capture, to be able to connect. And we've got some of those, the names like the Raiders, those instant affiliations that you can connect with, and those teams that can.
Well, as we know, the naming of our club, when you're to finally dig deepest, it does appear to have been a top-down decision.
Exactly right.
You're calling in you'll be the Raiders, you'll be the Steelers,
you'll be the Broncos,
so
you're the Broncos, and
so it goes on. Yeah, no, for sure.
And so I think that the games, was put in a bit of a position, and looked at the challenges, and there was finances, and there's different things, and it sort of made a few changes and took a few risks. And it's willing to have a shot at a couple of things like that.
I wasn't going to ask this question, but I will. It's the perfect segue, and that is the Rugby League authorities doing enough for bush footy? We've talked about that. You're obviously a wonderful, a classic product of bush footy. Is enough happening in the bush? And I say this against the background of the kind of pessimism, pessimism is not the right word, of the sort of disappointment that a lot of country towns are going through, losing their football teams, and I was lucky enough to play in group football in the South. Well, the Group 13 where I played is gone. In Group 9's under pressure. A lot of them are around the place. Is the Rugby League authorities doing enough for bush footy in New South Wales and Queensland?
Oh, look, I think it is doing a hell of a lot of good. I think if you were to look into it deeply, and that's not my role in the work that I do, there would be always things that we could do better. There would be certainly things that we could continue to do better. But I think there's also been a bit of a shift in mindset of a lot of young people now. I would have, if I didn't come to the Raiders, I would have done anything I could and played as long as I could in the bush footy. Like I would have loved to have played first grade, and just gone on and played that. I don't think there is as much aspirations to do that like it was back probably in my time growing up in country footy. And so we've got to bring that sort of that community spirit and different things. In some areas, it's thriving. In the little community that I grew up in, our closest, even though we were the Peel Valley Juniors, it was a mixture of young country kids that all got to play. We're back, I think it was in the 1950s, there was a Dungowan rugby league team. It went belly up and stopped for a number of years, and then all of a sudden it got rebooted again just around the 2000, and now it is the biggest contributor to junior football in Tamworth. And it's on the outskirts, it's all country. And so you get the right environment, you get the right people, and you get the right...
And isn't it interesting how often when one reads the good news stories these days, it's usually because the football team has been resuscitated. Yep. It's usually because of that, that generate... And we read the same stories incidentally with Australian rules right around the country as well when they get something back. So I think that's such an important thing for Peter Volandis, Abdo and company in rugby league to have one very firm eye on that aspect of it. Absolutely. To do it along with what they're doing. Let's change tack entirely, but not quite. And that is, so you retire in 2011. You finally have looked back on it and felt that it was the right decision at the right time, and you'd probably make it again if in hindsight. You didn't waste any time, and that goes to what people have been hearing in this interview, that you wanted to give back to the game. Were you clear on the kinds of things you wanted to do early? And that's question number one. And question number two, what did you do in those first years post-retirement? And we'll get to, of course, the last few years shortly.
Yeah, so there was, when I finished up, I went and got the surgery and got fixed up, had a knee cleaned out, a shoulder done, I got a hamstring graft, I popped that into my shoulder there to get the AC back in place. And I had thought that I would stay involved in regards to, I enjoyed the strength and conditioning side of things, and coaching was something that had sort of, it had been something inside me that I thought I'd love to be able to do that. The club had offered me a position to be able to stay on and help out, which I was really grateful for. But I think I needed to have a bit of a break for a couple of reasons. One, I'd seen players come straight out and go straight back into that, and you've been best mates with them, and now you're becoming a coach, and that can be really tricky. But also, I'd seen that some of the coaches that I'd had, some of the best things were actually having those experiences away from footy, and that knowledge and those being able to connect with you more than just playing and talking about rugby league. And so I really felt like having those experiences, what I would do, I'd be able to take those and it'd make me a better coach. And so I said, for 12 months, I'm just going to say yes to anything and everything that gets thrown my way. The NRL had asked me to come on and do some ambassadorial work. Yep. I was doing some personal training stuff when I was doing some corporate work as well down here, just doing some small little things, but I didn't have a 9 till 5 job. I just kept it really open. And I just said yes to anything and everything that came my way. And how I got involved in the community work in particular is I did some youth working certificates and diploma of small business. I'd had my mechanics degree behind me. I'd started a PE degree at university. I'd started that. I did a bridging course and got into university and thought, maybe that could be a path that I could continue down. But I got asked, I attend a church over in Belconnen. and they asked me to go in and share my testimony one Sunday at the Juvenile Justice Centre. And I went in there, and there was about 25 odd kids in the centre at the time, and 2 came to hear me speak. I thought, far out, I've only been retired a couple of months. These kids they've forgotten already. And I was walking out, and one of the guys said to me, he said, man, you got a pretty good story. He said, you had have brought some footies in here, you would have had every one of these kids. I said, I'll come back. I come back and I took some footies in, and I started to share a bit of my story, a bit of the stuff through footy, a bit of the challenge of being picked up.
Learn on the job, that's what you were doing. Yeah, no, that's great.
And all of a sudden we created a program.
Yeah, right.
And that's when I saw the real power of sport and being able to change people's lives.
Open doors, you know, in the best sense.
Absolutely.
Doors to lives, you know, that's exactly right.
And so in one of the first workshops I did, I actually came back into the club, and I asked if I could get some old jerseys. And the club said, yeah, no worries, Tony. So I had all these old jerseys the players have played in. And I took it into this program, and an 8-week program called the Aspire program. And I went in there and I laid out all the jerseys on the table. I said, fellas, and there was a couple of girls in there, I said, come up, grab a jersey. It's yours, whichever one you want. And they're coming up there and they're picking up, oh man, this number here, this is Terry Campese's number here. Bang, they're putting on, how good is this? And I said, you know what, that is my gift to you, but guess what? You've got to give it back to me after every session. I'll take it home, I'll wash it, and I'll bring it back for you. If you complete this 8 weeks, you get to keep the jersey.
Right.
Because if you work hard in life, you know what, you get rewards at the back end.
Yeah.
But if you don't finish it, or you get in strife and you can't come along, well, you're not going to get the jersey. I never had one young person miss that. In fact, the one kid that was getting released a bit earlier than the end. He didn't want to leave because he wanted to finish that. I said, that's okay, you can take the jersey, you can go. But it's amazing that power of sport, once again, to be able to use that. And
now, that was quite early. So we're talking the first couple of years after.
This is 2012.
Yeah, right.
We did that. And then out of doing some work for the NRL, doing some of this juvenile justice, word from there got spread to a high school, asking if you can do it in the high school. So I took the program into a high school. One high school led to 14 high schools I was doing the workshops in. Doing 1 day a week with the NRL, became 2, became 3, became 4, and just kept growing and growing. And NRL asked about some of the workshops that I was doing in there. Could you create some stuff for us? And so we started in the Juvenile Justice Centre in Canberra, designing sessions in my little garage at the back out at home, to now some of these programs are done in Papua New Guinea, Fiji, Tonga, Samoa, right across Australia.
And are they, so let's move from there then to now. What's the relationship? What in terms of what you're doing right now in 2023? What are the programs that have endured? And clearly they are. What are the ones? Is it mainly that sort of there's still that ambassadors? Is the ambassador's job with the NRL? Tell us a bit about the present and what you're doing right now.
Yeah. So my role at the NRL is in community and participation, and it's actually in charge of innovation. So the programs that get created and get delivered in the community from our community and participation team. It's my role to actually create the content and the resources that get trained up with our staff to go out and deliver. And so...
just on that, because people would be curious, and I certainly am, concentrating on life after football, where are the areas of concentration?
So the programs that I get connected with are around young people in particular, and it's not about the NRL playing whatsoever.
Right.
It's about local clubs, it's about local communities, it's about young people that have never played the game and may never play the game, but it's actually using the values of sport to enrich people's lives. We have primary school programs, we have high school programs, we've got grassroots footy club programs, and they're all around education and inspiring people to be the best they can be. It can be around a social issue, if it's domestic violence, it could be around mental health, social cohesion, but we use all the language that we would use in rugby league, and we use that to connect that with the message to the young people.
Did I read somewhere that you had connected in some way to Matty Elliott, the work that he was doing? Have I got that wrong? Wasn't he doing something similar going back a few years?
Yeah, well, he's got a program, and don't quote me on this, but I think it's the change room, is it, or something? I think it's called.
That sounds right.
But it is a similar, in a roundabout way.
But you're not in any way working closely with one another. Yeah, I'm just interested.
And so it's been really great. It started out as just some community work and making things up as I go.
And is that pretty much, well, it sounds like it's more than full time, but is that the work you're doing now, which it's got its various strands under that umbrella, as it were, of innovation?
Yeah, okay. So it's probably about 30 or 40% of my work is actually creating programs, and the other 30-40% is actually delivering programs as well, and then that utility off the bench for the other 10 or 15%, doing different things in the area. It could be presenting at a partners conference, it could be creating some content or going somewhere else or training up staff in other different areas, or helping out wherever I'm needed. So all of the things that are ingrained in me of those early years of the Raiders are exactly what I'm doing in the workplace now.
Do you, or sort of slash the NRL, employ people's staff for what you're doing under you, as it were?
Yeah. So I mean, not so much under me that I just train up a lot of the staff in our community.
Right. And go out and see how they're rolling.
Yeah, and but this the resource that we've just finished creating now. With the current numbers that we do, it'll probably see around 100,000 young people over the next 2 years. And we'll train up about 200 staff with that resource to go out. And so one of the key messages, and another message that has come from my playing days, is one of the workshops that we do all focuses around my under-6 coach. My under-6 coach, which was Sam Fogarty from the Peel Valley Juniors. Right. His message was, you got to pass the footy the way you'd like to receive it.
Fantastic.
And so that's a part of our respect resource. You pass the footy the way you'd like to receive it, you treat others the way that you'd like to be treated and spoken to.
You want to get a good ball.
Yeah. And so we use all of these rugby league messages, and this year's one is around being simply your best. So it's not about being the best, but it's about using your gifts and talents and just knowing that when you walk away, you've given absolutely your best. That's all anybody can ask you.
And you were saying, in terms of the kind of the broad net that we're talking about, do you presumably some you would go back to, others you'd feel they're pretty much working independently now? Would that be right? Sort of thing that once they've got their own feet on the ground and you can see that it's operating well, then you've done your work.
Yeah, that's right. I'm just the coach. Just trying to give them a game plan and let them run with it. They can make it. They do their little tweaks and they bring their unique gifts and abilities. But I just try and give them a program or a framework to work to that they've got there, but really trying to empower them to just do their best with they've all got your little unique talents and abilities, and you've got to bring that and put that on display. So that's how I try and run it.
Well, I can only hope that a lot of the present Raiders are going to be looking at this interview at some stage in the next few years, especially when they're getting towards the end of their careers, to imagine the kind of thing that they could do. Because that's, as we know, that continues to be an issue for rugby league and indeed other sports, and that's life after you've been something of a high-profile sports person. It's difficult.
And it's been great to, just of the last 2 months, just being able to come back to the Raiders to work in the leadership culture space, which has been fantastic. I've spoken at a couple of our retired player functions over the last couple of years. And one of the big things that I've always tried to encourage the players is understanding that everything that you learn in rugby league, they're all transferable skills. Everything that made you successful on the field is going to help you be successful in whatever career you want. In fact, it's going to help you to be one of the best in whatever field you choose. Because you've been in a high-performing team, some for only 1, some for 10, some for 15, whatever you're lucky enough to have. But your every move has been recorded, has been reviewed, you've been critiqued on every little thing. In my workplace, I get, quarterly, check-ins.
Sure.
You've got it every effort you do. So you're actually got this mindset of absolute excellence in everything that you do. If you take that mindset and you continue it in your workplace, you're going to smash it out of the park. You've got all the skills that you need to be successful in whatever field you want, if you take that same mentality.
Does that? I'm curious on this one. Does your work take you to various other? Or how often? Perhaps I should be asking, to other clubs beside the Raiders.
Yeah, I mean, more so in regards to our education, our rookie camps and different things that we do.
Right.
About 2019, end of 2018, 2019, the domestic violence program that I was running, we were on our trip to do every NRL club, but then COVID hit us, that slowed us up.
Is that program continuing today?
No. Oh, sorry, the program is, yes,
Right.
but we didn't get to do all of the NRL
everything
clubs.
you wanted.
But no, it's still running. It's full steam ahead.
Okay, well, I suppose, beginning to wind up a little bit, in the first instance, and when I do want to return to culture and say a little bit more about club culture. In terms of this business of culture and history, is there more in which the two can be connected? Do you feel, it's interesting, and I've got to put it in there, I think, and in fact I've been having some communication with Graham Annesley at NRL headquarters about this very issue, because the NRL is not doing a lot with its own history. You only have to go there to have a look, and it's something that doesn't worry me, but it inspires me to keep going through the kinds of things that one hears from individuals like yourself, where culture and history not just collide, but sort of work off one another. Is there something more that the Raider Club you feel could be doing? And to give one instance, and I have to say it, Marion Ferner I interviewed recently with son Don, and we were talking about it. I wasn't aware of this, nor was Don, as it turned out, that his mother had been keeping scrapbooks since she met Don Ferner Sr. in Tumbarumba in 1960. So that she's got this scrupulous set of scrapbooks from 1960 in rugby league through 1982 up to 2023. I just say this because I'd love to get motivated, not motivated, but individuals like yourself who are doing such great work in the sphere of culture and indeed broadening the game for its best value in the community to understand that in fact you can learn from the past. And I say that because I want to put you on notice right at the end of the interview. I'm not expecting you can find that particular poster to be able to actually present that to the club, but it's worth raising the issue of you being one of the, not just stalwarts of the club, but someone who epitomises as, and I remember that well, and I mentioned him earlier, Dean Lance did earlier, in a period of stars. He was never seen as a star as such, and yet he was absolutely vital to the fabric, not only on the field, but in fact in life after, which is precisely what you're doing. I want you to have a think about that, and indeed in the future. And maybe, is it possible in winding up the interview to comment on the connection between history and culture and what it might offer the code as well as this club?
Well, I think they certainly go hand in hand, and you can see that. I think the culture has certainly got better at our club once we brought back the Forever Green, and we've started to really think about the old boys' days. And so one thing that when I think about growing up in the bush and the culture that I was a part of as a young kid is that you never wanted to shame your mum and dad's family name. That was one of the things, like you wanted to make sure that you represented your family name really importantly. And so I don't think that's any different to being at a club. You know who's come before you. And throughout my time, we had a little saying that you always leave the jersey in a better place. That's your role as a player when you come to this club, is that there's been people that have played before. You got to remember who's worn this jersey, the sacrifices that were made for people that have done it. You've got this jersey now and you got to rip it and you got to make them proud. But when you leave, you got to make sure that whoever comes after us, it's left in a better place. And so history and culture, I think, go hand in hand. Knowing who's come before you, owning your time, but making sure it's set up better for those coming after us.
I don't think I could end on a better place for this interview. Alan Tung, thanks so much for your time.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
Canberra Raiders respect and honour the traditional custodians of the land and pay our respects to their elders, past, present and future.
We acknowledge the stories, traditions and living cultures of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples on the land we meet, gather and play on.
This project was supported with funding made available by the ACT government under the ACT Heritage Grants program.